I'm Jason Bradford.
I'm Asher Miller.
And I'm Rob Dietz. Welcome to Crazy Town, where yesterday's bad news is today's feel-good story. So here in Crazy Town, we're not averse to letting the listener into our own little dark world here. But I'm going to pull back the curtain even a little more and talk about the texts that I received this past weekend.
Oh, geez. Why would you do this? This is private stuff, man.
Yeah, this is very private.
I am not going to read word for word or anything like that.
Jason sexting you? Is that what you're talking about?
No.
Well, let me just say, here's the text that I sent to you guys, which is, look at these sea lions swimming up the Willamette River at the park in Portland, Oregon. It was really cool to watch them. In response...
They were kind of far away and small, though. I mean, it's like you couldn't really tell.
If that were the response, that would have been fine. Instead, the response from Jason is some AI is going to kill us all. I don't mean to disrupt everybody's weekend. So then what did I send? I sent Asher a painted rock that I saw on the ground that said, "We love Asher."
Right.
And then what's Asher's response to that? It's like, what the actual frick? Except you didn't say frick, of course. And this wasn't regarding the stone. You were like in on the AI thing. Jason writes a huge paragraph. It's just this downward spiral of we're all going to die.
Well,
yes.
Yeah, when I hear that there's a chat room just for AI agents to talk to each other and shit on their humans, like all of that is just so insane to me. Yeah. Can you blame me?
I just want to say I'm a little concerned about the state of your mental health and...
You're concerned? What do you think I feel? You have no idea, Rob. Actually, we protect you. So Asher and I have our own chat going on Signal, so Big Brother isn't paying attention to that, we hope.
Although we did invite some weird people in there, right?
The journalist from The Atlantic.
Some cabinet members of the government.
Yeah, Department of War.
I don't know who they are.
Yeah. But in that one... Asher is like sharing stuff about the Thwaites Glacier or whatever, and stuff like this. And
I like glaciers. I like walking on them.
Do you like them breaking off and raising sea level by, massive amount in a short period of time?
Well, this is why I'm not in Signal, I guess. So
Yes, exactly.
We were actually trying to protect you.
We're protecting.
But here's the thing. I think it's important for us to actually look at what we're dealing with. Maybe we don't have to get obsessed over it. It could be slightly healthier than maybe Jason and I do. But
yes.
For example, on the climate front, it's completely lost in the conversation right now because there's so many other things that are happening. And so I'm really glad, Jason, that you just had a conversation with somebody who's very knowledgeable about this.
Yes.
And I appreciated that a lot.
Yes, I feel, okay, Emily Schoerning's her name, American Resilience.
Yeah, Emily's a great science communicator.
And I'm not a talent scout, but I kind of have an idea, an inkling of what it must feel like to be a talent scout who just comes across somebody and finally goes, there they are. That's the next big thing. I'm going to platform them. And so that's what I feel like happens with Emily.
Well, Emily is awesome.
I don't know if she needed your platforming.
Emily is awesome. I will say she probably can be right there in the darkness with you guys. But she's really good also. Like you said, her stuff is American Resiliency, and she's about how do we deal with this? How do we adapt to what's coming? How do we understand what's going on in climate and what to do? That's the amazing part to me.
Finally, someone is telling it straight and providing details, but in ways people can understand.
And the other thing is, look, I never saw the positive side of AMOC collapse, but she pointed it out to you, Jason. That was incredible.
Yes, I know.
So I would say, listeners, stay tuned. We're really fortunate to be able to share this conversation Jason had with Emily. Ride it out a little bit. She's going to tell it straight to you, but there's definitely stuff that you guys talk about towards the end of the conversation that I think gave me a little bit of hope, or at least a sense of agency.
Yeah,
right?
Adaptation is the new name of the game, basically. So,
well, I do love how it all clarifies. If you're looking at the depth of the problem and you're thinking mitigation versus adaptation, you go squarely to adaptation. If you're like Jim Moore in the playoffs, mitigation? Don't talk to me about mitigation.
I wish I understood what you were talking about there.
I did.
Okay, good.
It's me and Rob and maybe one other listener. Let us know, listeners, if you know what the hell Rob is talking about.
All right, let's get to Emily.
I'm really happy to have Emily Schoerning here on the show. She's a very unique voice, taking complex subject of climate and making authoritative but accessible YouTube channels, keeping folks up to date not only on how the science is changing, but really doing something I've never seen before and making it relevant on very local and regional levels. Most of the YouTube videos are about the United States, but occasionally other areas of Earth are covered. And although the channel has a climate focus, it's informed by wider systems issues and how they may intersect with a changing climate. And she recognizes the processes that people go through that really start to understand this, of grief. And it seems like models and encourages the kind of emotional maturity that we need to respond thoughtfully and skillfully to our predicament. So I really want to thank you for joining me on Crazy Town, Emily.
Jason, I'm really honored to be here and have this conversation with you.
Okay, I just want to get into first the backstory of American Resiliency. What role did you see that needed to be filled, and how did you make it happen?
I founded American Resiliency in 2021, but I started thinking about AR in 2015 when I was working with the National Center for Science Education. And there I was working with the general public on communicating what you might call socially controversial science, including evolution and climate change.
Oh, wow.
And in my work on the ground, interacting with the public at large, like festival spaces, I did a lot of large crowd work. There was so much appetite, especially for climate information. I would often communicate with people at that sort of local and regional level, talking about what changes we expected here. And so many people who were just not normally included in the climate conversation were really enthusiastic, really energized, really hungry. I felt like there was an empty space in the climate field where there was a need for connecting the general public with local projection information. And that's what made me start visioning about AR. And I worked hard to try to get conventional funding for AR. I couldn't get any grant funding or conventional funding. And I received a lot of negative feedback that there wasn't really an audience for climate information that connected to the local, that there weren't people who really cared about this stuff, that the public was disengaged from this stuff. But my experience is I knew that they were out there. I knew there was a public appetite for this information, and I saved up for years to get enough runway where I could work on the project for a while. Having a chance to do this was my dream, and I fully accepted that it was probably not going to work out, but we're off the runway. We've been off the runway for about 18 months, and it was a real trust fall. I believed in our American communities and in their real desire for this kind of information, and I'm so grateful to everyone who believed in me and who contributes to supporting AR.
It's kind of amazing that you had to do this independently rather than this being just part of whatever system is in place when national climate assessments are put out to help people understand it. Can you explain a little bit why that's the case?
My understanding is that in the language that funded the National Climate Assessment specified that no money was to be spent federally on communication. And it's assumed that organizations that use the NCA are going to be communicating it as part of their use.
Right.
When I began my work with American Resiliency, I was surprised for a while how few people, and here we're talking about people who are with it, who are informed, who like to stay on top of the news, who care about climate, who didn't know what the NCAs were or that they existed.
Right. Okay. I get that. National climate assessments, and there's been 5, and you go through your videos and draw a lot from them. So I noticed that you're both able to present what would be sort of the conventional narrative on climate, but also recognize that there may be some things that we don't hear enough about, that sometimes there's a little bit of maybe what you call scientific reticence to tell the full story. It reminds me a little bit of James Hansen, who studies paleoclimate. And I recall years ago, he was talking about how climate risks are being downplayed and that the modeling, right, the computer modeling, obviously to him as a paleoclimatologist, isn't capturing long-term system feedbacks properly. And so you do rely extensively on these national climate assessments. And I'm also wondering, though, to what extent are these based on models that underplay tipping points? And if so, how do you incorporate sort of uncertainty and potentially paleoclimate into your scenario development that you present to people?
They're critically important points, these tipping point and uncertainty points. We are hitting tipping points now that will impact complex Earth system interactions. Even looking away from the ocean heat transport systems that I like to watch, that I talk about in my work a lot, there's very clear evidence that we are currently exceeding pH and temperature thresholds in many ocean ecosystems.
Yeah.
I don't think most people are aware of the severity of the impacts we would currently expect to unfold from those tipping points alone regarding ocean life.
It seems to me that in the last few years, there has been a bit of a change in this, right? That some things have been happening that have been very surprising, and there's some reporting on it. Can you go over a little bit of how the thinking and talking about the climate situation has changed, especially, I guess, since probably 2023?
Anyone who was watching incoming Earth systems information saw what happened in late spring of 23. We had this intense jump in warming. We shot up to about 1.5 C above pre-industrial baseline, which I'm sure you remember for the many years that was where we were trying to limit warming, right? They've shifted it to 2 now in the conversation, but 1.5 C is where we knew tipping point impacts were likely to multiply.
Yeah.
In 23, we shot up to 1.5 C. We pretty much stayed there. This rapid step up in global temps is really significant. We did not follow the projected path to 1.5 C. We got there sooner than projected. There appears to be evidence of substantial uncertainty in our current modeling used for policy.
Yeah.
Because there's a fair amount of consensus in the policy field that if you want to do some adaptation work, some resilience work, get ready for the broad grab bag of incoming hazards. It's much more affordable and practical to do big adaptation and resilience projects before 2C.
Mm-hmm.
The window between 1.5 C and 2 C is the time to do that work if you're going to try to do it. I didn't think we'd be here so soon, but we have to look at where we are, and we're here.
And can you talk a little bit about, I guess there's still a little bit of a mystery of exactly how do we get there? And then what does this rapid heating do to these, maybe some of these tipping point scenarios? Why do they become more relevant?
So there are a lot of fairly well-supported hypotheses for what may have contributed to that jump. The last I heard was that Gavin Schmidt is a serious man, encourages people in the field to assume that we don't really know what's happening, that we still need to be exploring and trying to understand what happened, that getting too involved with any hypothesis in this dynamic and changing system, we shouldn't let that stop us from investigating. And so I think that he's got a good position there.
Yeah.
It's not as though we have no idea what happened, but we may not actually understand the ultimate mechanism, and we may have less understanding than we wish we did about Earth system interactions. Does that make sense? I hope I said that clearly enough.
Well, it's uncomfortable because, what you really want is even if it's bad news, you want to try to know, like, okay, what am I getting ready for? And to have these scientists who've been, like you're saying, had some pretty good modeling exercises, like the models have been very good. And then suddenly they started failing. And you're like, what don't we understand? That's kind of scary, right? And it's scary also in a way, like it got worse a lot faster. So what's next? Can we trust? So what does this do for people who are paying attention in terms of their trust in these institutions?
I feel like we need to stop waiting for the grown-ups to enter the room. We are the grown-ups. And that working at local resilience. What are the food systems and the water systems that will be resilient in a time of change in your community? It's an important time to address those questions.
Yeah.
It's an important time to look at the kind of hazards that are coming your way and decide if you're in the place that you want to be or not. I think that we have to do the work ourselves.
Very much a crazy town theme is that the higher up you look, the nuttier it is, and it seems like the least helpful the institutions are. But you may have a chance at a local level, and especially with people that you know and trust. And for a climate, that's really sad because it's such a commons problem that requires international cooperation to put our best foot forward in stemming it. But it doesn't seem like that's happening, and that's part of like the grief process, I think.
Oh, it's really hard. The failure of mitigation messaging to have to look at how much time and effort and money was put into mitigation messaging. And it didn't work.
Yeah.
I think that that makes many people in the climate field feel like things are hopeless and we can't really have change. But the public reception to resilience messaging, in my experience, is very different than mitigation messaging. A lot of people don't want to hear about things that they shouldn't do,
Mm.
things to give up.
That's what mitigation is largely about.
When we talk about resilience, we're talking about positive action with resilience.
Mm-hmm.
Like renting a backhoe and building a rain garden can be more appealing than never eating steak again as a message, right?
Right.
And I think that mitigation messaging also kind of positioned humanity as needing to refrain from active harm, where when we look at climate systems, biological systems, earth systems, refraining from active harm is not where we are. We've got a real problem. We need to take up the work of healing.
Mm.
We need positive action. Taking ourselves off the stage doesn't clean up this mess.
It's sort of the message of modernity is that larger systems and powers and technologies will handle this for you, help us out a little bit by toning down your consumption, but we're going to come up with some whiz-bang technology, as opposed to saying, do this work on the land to be more resilient. That's a very different message. So that's why I find so much alignment between your message and sort of what we talk about in this podcast.
Well, I've been a fan of Crazy Town for many years,
Oh,
so
wow.
getting to come and talk with you here is a cool experience for me.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Okay, let's get into some of the tipping point that seems to be the one that you talk about the most is the AMOC. You say it's near-term collapse may be better news than not collapsing. That's kind of a shocking statement to make. It's very sobering. And I want you to sort of go over a little bit what AMOC is. Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation or something like that.
Well, it's like an ocean heat transport system.
Yeah.
It's a salt-based heat transport system where heat moves through the Atlantic Ocean based on saline gradients. And if it goes down the way we've modeled, if it happens the way we'd expect, northern hemisphere cooling is a projected near-term outcome of AMOC collapse. I can see people weighting this problem differently, but my personal climate boogeyman is methane.
Mm-hmm.
We know there's a lot of methane that's ready to pop, ready to go up into the atmosphere from the permafrost in the Arctic. I've heard enough ground reports to keep me freaked out forever if I think about them too hard, of bubbling ground, where the methane is boiling out of the ground from friends who've gone hiking in Canada. If AMOC collapse could cool down the Arctic enough to cap off that methane, at least it would buy the biosphere some time. I think that that's our most present risk for rapid runaway warming is that methane in the Arctic permafrost. So if we can get some good hard northern hemisphere cooling, maybe that's good. But of course, there are other big Earth system problems with AMOC collapse. I'm not saying that it's like AMOC collapse, how delightful, right?
Right.
I just don't want the methane. I'm willing to put down whatever it takes to stop the methane.
Right.
I think the most concerning big Earth system problem with AMOC collapse is probably if you get big temperature changes in the southern oceans, you could get a big population shift of phytoplankton in the southern oceans. And much of the oxygen, the majority of the oxygen in the Earth's oxygen cycle comes from the oceans,
Yes.
right? So if you get a big collapse of phytoplankton, that could mess up global gas exchange in an exciting way for all of us who like to breathe oxygen at a particular concentration.
Yeah. So the permafrost essentially defrosting and then methane release from like old peat, these sort of things, vast areas is what we're talking about, is the big risk if we get 2C plus and it just goes. And then we have a
Hmm.
positive feedback loop, which is not a nice thing often, positive in a bad direction. And we then quickly accelerate above 3C to 4C, boom, absolutely horrific. So the case you're making is that an AMOC collapse, or AMOC, would refreeze the Arctic, and that permafrost would get locked in. Is there other stuff that could release, methane that could release from the ocean that's bound up?
We're seeing some signs of methane release from Antarctica
Uh-huh.
as we have this unprecedented Antarctic ice melt. Like we may be screwed every way, right?
Right.
I see the methane in the northern hemisphere in the far north as the worst of the devils we know.
Yeah.
In
Okay.
this case, I think it's a bad enough devil that I would rather not stick with the devil we know.
Okay.
But it's a complex system, and there are a lot of other bad things that could happen, to say it in kind of a childish way.
Okay.
In the modeling that's come out, the heating is really concentrated on the oceans and over Antarctica. So the ice melt would be substantial under that
Yes.
modeling. And I think that we need to be concerned about those impacts on the ocean and think about marine sciences much more seriously as we want to move forward in this changing system.
I keep hearing of the Thwaites Glacier. So Greenland may ice up again, but the ocean getting hot on the shores of Antarctica really risks sort of West Antarctic ice sheet, right? And so we may get accelerated sea level rise even with a AMOC collapse or something like that. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah. Even if you got a bit of a lockdown in the north, if you had some healthy re-expansion of sea ice in the
Mhm.
north, there's so much ice bound up at the South Pole that you would still expect accelerated sea level rise in an AMOC collapse scenario.
Okay. The other question I had was related to what the IPCC talks about is sort of economic models of what do we expect to happen related to a combination of economic growth and technological innovation and substitution for fossil fuels, more or less. But it's related to sort of human civilization. And I always question this because you point out, like, you don't expect global civilization as we know it in any way, shape, or form to survive an AMOC collapse, or probably like a 2 to 3C event, right?
I think it's going to bork us up pretty good, yeah.
What do we make of these IPCC reports that are like, we figure out a green transition, we have a 2.6, or we just burn more coal and we're an 8.5? But in either way, like the economy is a lot bigger, right?
Well, and there are these complex interactions at even a foot of sea level rise.
Yeah.
The number of people who will be directly impacted, it's in the hundreds of millions in Southeast Asia alone.
Yeah.
The loss of life in the oceans from the tipping points we already hit, it's going to cause major problems in places where people eat a lot of food that comes from the ocean.
Yes.
And I think it's like a bit shallow to just look at this human impact, but I'm trying to go into that economic lens, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The complexity of the interactions from those tipping points, it just can't be overstated. It's hard to say exactly how that's going to impact, but I find it implausible that we're going to follow any of those pathways. I think the pathways we're going to be walking are going to be more local and more crooked than would be expected. That would be my intuition there.
Right. So I get a sense that you're trying to juggle these official institutional narratives, a lot of really good scientists doing the best they can in complex organizations and putting out these very, very expansive, detailed reports, but they fall short in the ways we've kind of gone over. And you're sort of saying, okay, it's up to us to figure some stuff out.
There are important advances being made outside of the US. and trying to stay connected to that international community and help bring relevant information to the ground here with the people around me and all over. I think that we should not give up hope that we will continue to get useful information, even in the face of the opposition we're dealing with right now.
Now, I want to turn a little bit. You make most of your videos about America, North America, the United States is your territory, your focus, but you also now and then do a somewhere else in the globe kind of review. Most recently, there was a South Asian video you did that was really, really hard to watch. You were talking about Pakistan, India, Bangladesh. It came out December of 2025. Some real devastating scenarios. Let's review that a little bit and talk about why this global awareness is also needed in addition to the local one.
It is so hard to look at some of these areas that will feel the most direct, profound tipping point impacts. I tell you, when I opened up the sea level rise modeling tool to look at Bangladesh at even 1 foot of sea level rise, I started crying and I had to walk out and then come back and look again. Because there are so many places where we expect impacts on a whole different scale than we do within the continental US. I focus on the continental US because it is my home turf. I feel like I have enough cultural understanding to help information really hit the ground. It also used to be that we had a better clarity, a better granularity of data for the US than almost anywhere else, but there have been these huge advances in global modeling
Hmm.
lately. If you look at AMOCscenarios.org, which they got such a great name for their website, right?
Yeah.
That's pretty granular global modeling. Coastalclimatecentral.org. I use it for all of my sea level rise modeling. They don't have as suite of like marsh migration as the NOAA website has, but it's global and it's extremely granular.
Hmm.
I also recommend looking at the World Bank Climate Portal for international information. I think that for people in the US, a lot of people in the US who are climate aware, we really aren't aware of the risk spread in local projection information. A lot of people who are climate aware, they fear being a primary victim
Right.
in this unfolding global scenario. They feel intense personal risk, and we all are going to experience this global disaster. But I think it's very important that listeners in the US take in that we're not first in the triage line. We are not in one of the most severely impacted areas. And to mix a little disaster metaphor here, I think that we are in a scenario in the US where we need to be putting on our oxygen masks first because there's a tremendous global need. That need is going to become more marked as we approach and surpass 2C. And if we don't have our situation in order, our ability to help in a more challenging future will be greatly reduced. When we look at ag outlooks for the US, we could still be a major food exporter at 2C. At 2C, we expect many European food systems to collapse. If we want to be able to send them food, we got to do the work now, you know?
Hmm.
We can't bring the best future we can imagine into being in this tight frame, in this limited frame that we're in, unless we start taking the problem seriously and doing real resilience work now. And I think we need to understand the full risk spread to do that.
You familiar with Andrew Millicent's work a little bit?
Yeah, a little bit.
He did some really interesting video documenting watershed restoration at village scales in India. There was this competition, this incredible competition. It was really well funded. The villages essentially own land in common at watersheds. And essentially what's happened in a number of places, and of course, there's thousands and thousands of these villages in India. It's absolutely, you can't even imagine how many there are, right? But a lot of them have taken this on as a challenge and have done incredible work of doing resilience work on their watersheds for food security and water security. You have these essentially really poor people who are facing situations we can barely imagine, both now and in the future. And the kind of work they are doing now to prepare, I think, is actually very inspiring. Like, I wish we had that kind of spirit here.
Yeah. We are all up against very serious challenges. And the response that we have on the ground, our ability to connect to each other and support each other and protect those water systems on the ground, is going to make such a big difference to our outcomes.
Mhm.
Right now, we're seeing some of the strongest responses in less developed parts of the world, in parts of India and in several African nations. We're seeing kind of a move away from the industrial development pathway towards preserving land relationship and getting, some renewables to improve your quality of life. But there's not so much this dream of the high consumption Western lifestyle.
Yeah.
And I think that turning away from that and valuing that earth relationship, people may have better outcomes with that approach.
Okay, so about that approach in the US, you have a whole series of videos on what you call the lifeboat regions, where climate may be more benign. And you actually suggest people may want to reside in these areas. Can you go over how you come up with these lifeboat regions for the US and where are they?
So, the lifeboat regions, there's two fairly large areas where I don't know if benign is the word that I would use. They're relatively low change
Yeah.
cross models. One's in the northern Midwest, one's in the Northeast. There are areas that look fairly stable, relatively low change in both AMOC up and AMOC down scenarios. They're at low risk for major earthquakes. With the sea level rise, we do sort of expect more seismic activity. There's surprisingly strong consensus on that point. And these two regions, they have the capacity to take in some population without water stress.
Mhm.
So just as like a counterexample, if you had a nice area in an arid environment, at a desert environment, looked pretty low change, looked stable in AMOC up and AMOC down scenarios. If you have a bunch of people move to this nice desert community, you're going to knock the water system over, right? You ruin the potential of the place.
Right.
The lifeboat regions, they're areas that if we had more people move to them, you could increase the potential resilience of the place. If you had more people wanting to do land work in those areas.
Right.
I think that if you care about the place, if you care about potential of place more than you care about like personal safety and a desire to insulate yourself, that's the mindset we need if we want to build the best future we can. And if you care about place, you should spend some more time learning on it.
Mhm. It's remarkable to think about people uprooting themselves for these kind of reasons, but we've had that kind of talk in the US for a while about migration, and Duluth keeps coming up.
I think it's so weird when that's actually far enough up north that it's in the band of high fire risk.
Okay.
Like, Duluth is not a place that I would consider a fabulous climate destination. It's true that they have very limited summer heating projected,
Mhm.
but the level of winter change is so high. Duluth's right by Superior National Forest, right?
Uh-huh.
That's one of our most fire-threatened national forests, especially as we move towards 2C. And the Ojibwe elders, you're up in Ojibwe lands
Uh-huh.
there up by Duluth, right? They were really the first group consistently sounding climate alarms from the 80s. They're like, life is cold dependent. The winter changes we're starting to see are very serious from the 80s.
Wow.
And I was just at the Midwest Climate Resilience Conference in October. There was great Indigenous leadership present at the conference. One of the big takeaways was that the spring choreography broke
Huh.
in the last couple of years. You used to have a very close tie between spring peeper emergence and when you would get walleye, when you would start fishing for walleye. And that has broken.
Hmm.
It just going north isn't the answer when you're trying to look for stability.
That's interesting because those forests you don't think of as being susceptible to fires, but now you're saying they're going to be more like the taiga forest that does have spectacular burn periodically. That's going to creep down. That level of burning of these forests is the issue.
The winter change is difficult for plants. Mature plants and trees, if they're cold adapted, they need a certain amount of chilling days. They need the cold to be productive, to do appropriate fruit and nut production. There is also another factor in America's North Woods that, although we don't think about it, and I was very surprised when I learned about it, Those were fire-managed landscapes. Indigenous land management techniques in the Northwoods did include fire.
Oh, interesting.
And that has been shown to significantly increase productivity in food plants. For example, blueberry. If you have fire move through blueberry scrub, you
Mhm.
get way more berries after traditional indigenous fire technique.
Okay.
I think that especially in the northern Midwest, we benefit from strong indigenous voices and leadership. And so instead of saying, oh, we've just lost the thread on this one, we could bring it back. We can bring indigenous land management practices back. And there are many groups that are working hard to do that. And that
Yeah.
could reduce the fire threat. I think overall, we really need to take seriously this idea that land management techniques are the weapon in our hand. We don't need to passively submit to a future of constant wildfire.
Right.
We are a species that is always be terraforming, right?
Mhm.
Look around you, right? Like everything that we're looking at right now is a human-made environment. And we've completely transformed the landscape of America. Like, where's the prairie,
Right.
right? We
Right.
completely destroyed it.
Yeah.
But then we act like we're helpless, that we can't do future crazy terraforming work, maybe even for good. Obviously, we can do it. We have to accept our responsibility and our capacity for change if we want to create the best future we can.
I think you're absolutely right. It's fascinating. I thought that, we should have named ourselves Homo combustus because fire is basically what we do. I think you're right.
Hey, this is Rob. Crazy Town is planning a mailbag episode in which we read and respond to your emails. So if you have a question, an idea for an episode, maybe an insult to hurl at Jason or Asher, or maybe you've got an example of how you navigate the mean streets of Crazy Town, well, we'd love to hear from you. So please send us an email to crazytown@postcarbon.org. That's crazytown@postcarbon.org.
And so let's turn to the Willamette Valley because that's where I live. So I want to learn from you, but also I want to give people a sense of what it's like to hear from you on your channel. And let's go over then where I live because I'm familiar and I can more likely engage in conversation. This was a big fire area as well. Okay, I live in the Pacific Northwest, Willamette Valley. Let's go over what your themes are for this area, what to pay attention to in the Pacific Northwest to start out.
When we look at the big change picture for the Pacific Northwest, the fundamental, deepest change is to the water cycle. Traditionally, you have a snowpack-fed hydrology in the Pacific Northwest, much of the region. We're moving towards rain-dominated watersheds across the region, and that's a big change.
Mm-hmm.
We have many places where peak stream flow has traditionally been in August. Peak stream flow is projected to change to February. That's a big change.
Yeah, it's huge.
When we look at these recent atmospheric rivers, a lot of them fell as rain instead of snow because it's warmer now than
Yes.
it was. If we see, as it's projected, that trend continue, we're feeling it now. It always is different to feel it than to project it. But this is what the transition from a snowpack fed to a rain dominated watershed looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And water managers across the region have been working to prepare infrastructure and communities. And we have to think about the impacts this is going to have on landscapes and lifeways as well. You're looking at a totally different level of erosion. You're looking at streams that won't be cooled by snowpack in the same way. So you may not have the cool mountain streams in the region that have been so important for trout, for all your salmonoid type fish.
Mm-hmm.
And you're looking at soils that are going to be receiving water differently, pushing towards less water availability, even if total precipitation increases, because you're not getting that gradual watering by snowpack,
Right.
and that could result in fire. So it's a terrible cascade of changes. It's much more change than anyone would like to see projected for the Pacific Northwest. I think that in a biological system, you never call it early, you know? It's always worth doing what you can as life persists. I feel like we are not in a place where we should be focused on mourning. While there's so much that's still alive, we need to try to focus on healing. In the projections, we're looking at a real possibility of landscape transformation in your area, that the area is going to move from trees to prairie, to tall grass. And I've seen that the indigenous names for the Willamette Valley meant the Valley of the Long Grasses. So it's interesting that this
Mhm.
transition is in some ways returning to that indigenous
Yeah.
landscape of prairie.
The valley was formed, as we know it, at the end of the last ice age with the Missoula floods and filling up of sediment. And you had a drier climate, too, at the end of the last ice age, I believe, in this area. So there was more of an oak savanna type habitat that was maintained by then the fire regime of the indigenous tribes here, the Kalapuyas. So it's interesting to think about now because of the drier, warmer temperatures. It wants to go back to that oak savanna again.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of interesting restoration work in this area. For example, the local watershed council does a lot of work to try to take these local creeks and capture sediment and encourage beavers and create more of a wetland mosaic so that the water coming off of the coast range, that those waters then hang up higher in the winter and have more time to sort of sink in underground so that when they emerge, they're emerging later and they're emerging colder. If you're a landowner, there's incredible amount of work you can do. These tiny little nonprofits that just struggle, right, to stay alive are doing some of the most important work.
There's a lot of advice that I give to landowners. I think that it's important that we take up the teaching that half of land should be for non-human beings. I have noticed in my small scale agriculture that as I set aside more land for biodiversity, my yields on less land are better because I have so much better pollination. I think that working to build community connection and local food systems are very important. And that for those of us who are living in agricultural areas, we know that there's complexity in agricultural communities right now. That's where you have some of the worst rates of suicide in America is in agricultural communities. People are suffering in agricultural communities because this extractive system is extracting human life as well, right?
Yeah.
Finding ways to look at the positive potential of the Willamette Valley, finding ways to look through this possibility of fire and see what lies beyond it, keeping the soil covered and the community together would be my focuses.
The good news is, from my perspective, is that I've seen that when you do take care of the soil and you do the practices you're talking about, bringing back biodiversity, keeping it covered more, using less harsh synthetic inputs, that the soil can recover pretty quickly. Like the biodiversity in the soil returns fast. And so that is also something that gives me hope. Now, it's hard to have conversations like we're having with people that aren't as up on the science, maybe little more reticent to deal with the potential for loss. What do you think about methods, ways of approaching this to talk about this more broadly, how to do it well? Do you have any suggestions?
I think that we need to acknowledge that there are some problems in the way we frame climate conversations today. We talked earlier about the failure of mitigation type messaging, that hasn't been effective, yet we keep doing the same thing. Institutions keep doing the same thing.
And distinguish mitigation messaging from sort of the adaptation messaging.
So, mitigation messaging is where we're focusing on getting emissions down, and that is important, but it is also true that rather than focusing on mitigation as well as adaptation or resilience, the conversation was kept right on mitigation. I think that we need to use some of the positive potential of resilience messaging to get more effective work on climate action. And what I'm going to say here is a little controversial, but I think that there's also a problem with the online spaces that we create for climate. I think that it's not uncommon for people to come off as jerks in those spaces, and so people don't want to listen to them. The climate space online, there's a little too much of the vibe that maybe it would be good if AMOC collapsed fast enough that it's okay not to brush your teeth, and then people will doom scroll more and not brush their teeth. Like we get these negative feedback loops, demotivating loops in online climate spaces. There are a lot of people who are interested in climate information who don't want to enter that kind of a space, or they want to enter a space that just has some scientific information instead of a lot of political signaling information. Other countries don't all do this thing that we do in the US, where climate science is a special kind of science that waves in the political wind. There are plenty of places where climate science is communicated like other forms of science. And there are many very talented science communicators for generations that have been doing amazing work in science communication with the general public. If we look at who's doing that really well today, Mark Rober is like at the top of the game.
Mark Rober?
Yeah, on public science communication.
Okay.
He's more of an engineer than a scientist, right?
Okay.
But Mark Rober's work has introduced millions of people to new scientific concepts and to an idea that they can solve problems themselves. And I think that that is very positive. And why don't we have more energy like that in the climate space? Climate science is full of terrifying information. It can be hard to encounter information that's scary, but we do it to work towards a solution. If we want to build the best future we can, we need to be using climate science to act rather than to just kind of marinate in it and experience full body horror all the time. That's not a solutions-oriented thinking.
I can't tell you how important it is to move and to do something real in the real world. I think you're absolutely right. The depression that sets in if you're just sitting in front of a screen reading terrible thing after terrible thing without having some way of being engaged is absolutely horrible. And there's so many ways to do something positive and get social connections at the same time. What about the idea that can you still live a good life even if you are feeling like a tremendous loss is coming? And what is your role in that situation? How many people are in that position, do you think?
I think that anyone who's climate aware, we're living in the shadow of tremendous loss. We are in a bottleneck event. We are in an extinction level event. When we look at Earth's history and biodiversity, we're currently experiencing a bottleneck event. We know from previous mass extinctions events that small populations matter. So it matters now more than ever that we save what we can save. We are living in a time where there is this dark shadow, the fear of loss. But we're also living in a time when our actions are so important for the future of life.
This is the thing, is like having meaning. People need meaning and purpose, right? And if you can't create that or find a way to do that with others, it's very hard to want to live. That's what you're saying. There's the depression, the suicide risk. But when you're living in a time like this, it's also an opportunity to have a life of tremendous meaning, in a sense, is what I'm getting from this. Even if you don't know if it's going to work. Like, I can't be sure all the stuff I do is going to work. I could be doing all this and then it's not the small population. I don't create the island of biodiversity that ends up surviving the bottleneck. But my sense is like, well, enough of it has to try to have more pass through the bottleneck.
We need to try. And it's had some positive impacts. When we look at butterfly numbers in 25 in the North American butterfly corridor, not talking about monarchs here, talking about other butterflies. There's a lot of them, right?
Yes, like 13,000 species or something.
This was the first year we saw an increase in many species. And it's because of people like you, like me, who are trying to make these habitat islands. We're making enough that the butterfly populations are beginning to be able to inch up.
Yeah.
It's a triumph of our collective action. And I think We're living in an environment where if you're looking at climate information, you're encountering negative information. It's very important to also touch Earth and see and experience the positive impacts of our actions. The work that I've done on local biodiversity, it could be the same as you, Jason, where it ends up that this is all scorched earth and some big chemical accident, right? But I feel like the generations that have reproduced at my place, they still matter.
Mm.
That the lives that they've been able to have matter. And we don't know the full impact of our work in our lifetimes. We never know what a ripple effect is going to be. I don't understand this ethic where we need to win for it to be worth fighting.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a more noble way to fight is just because you love to fight.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to fight for life.
Yeah.
Being able to continue sticking in like the guts of the climate information, my ability to do that has really been informed by the biodiversity work because it can be very difficult to expose yourself to so much horrifying information. I have to go out and walk around outside all the time.
Me too.
And I walk around outside and there are so many life forms that like I have a relationship with.
Mm-hmm.
There are many nesting birds that they come back during their migration season, and we can recognize each other as individuals.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what's on the screen is horrible, but this is my wren friend, and he's mad, so I'm going to focus on this moment, you know?
I totally do that. I mean, before we talked, I got to go I did birded for 20 minutes. There's this red-shouldered hawk that's just been hanging out here the last week, and I'm trying to get him to be used to me and not fly away, like, it's okay, because it's so spectacular. So, yeah, I don't know if what we're doing is the way, but it seems to work for us. I would say if you have a chance to connect to land, do that. That is one of the most healing things for yourself, as well as, and this is the irony, of course, we actually need people that are motivated and intelligent to work with the land in a way that human caring improves the land. Yeah, they go together. It's not just be online and write letters and recycle and put on solar panels on your house. But can you actually make changes on the land yourself? I think would be really helpful for people emotionally.
You know, you mentioned earlier in our conversation that these positive feedback loops are often rather terrifying in climate systems, but this is an example of a positive feedback loop,
Yeah.
the relationship with the earth.
Yeah.
That can really support and drive further positive action. I think there are a lot of people who want to be more connected to the earth, and we're in a productivity focused system that can make that difficult, can make it financially difficult.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it is such a valuable, mutually healing way to live. It's worth trying to break through. It's worth trying to find a path to earth relationship.
Yeah. Well, I want to look, if people go to your website and go to your YouTube channel, what are you looking forward to doing in 2026 that maybe new?
We're going to have new ways of getting climate information. I am going to be doing more integrated modeling. I hope to be doing more international overviews as well because the global modeling tools are so strong. And we're developing programs to help people do community organizing work on the ground to help them make their communities stronger.
That is all huge. And I know that on the ground stuff is really tough. And so I'm so excited that you're actually shifting to that as well.
I tell you, I'm so grateful that I wake up and I get to do this work every day. I have made so many wonderful connections with really cool people who are doing transformational work on the ground. And I know that the information that I've put out there has helped people feel empowered and make decisions in their lives in this time of change. I feel so fortunate to have the support of the AR community to do this work that I dreamed of doing for so long.
Well, Thank you so much for being part of the community here on Crazy Town. You're really an inspiration to us, and I'm really glad to finally be connected. So thanks for talking.
It's been a great conversation, Jason. I hope we'll stay in touch.
Oh, we sure will, Emily.
That's our show. Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard and you want others to consider these issues, then please share Crazy Town with your friends. Hit that share button in your podcast app or just tell them face to face. Maybe you can start some much needed conversations and do some things together to get us out of Crazy Town. Thanks again for listening and sharing.
Crazy Town, da 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 da, Crazy Town.